Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Scoreboard with Ethan. In this video, I'm going to talk about the biggest steals or value picks in rounds 1 through 7. So in round 1, I have the biggest steal is Jahad Campbell with the Eagles. The honorable mention will be Jahdae Barron. Like, both of these players are top 15 players. I think Jahdae Barron, in my opinion, was a top 10 player. So these are steals for the Eagles and the Broncos. Great picks, day 1 starters. So these are huge steals. Jahad Campbell went 31st to the Eagles. I had him really as like anywhere going from like maybe the highest I think he would have went was like 12 to the Cowboys, and then he ended up going 31st to the Eagles, so that was a huge steal for them. In round 2, I have Donovan Ezaraku as like my biggest steal. He went 44th to the Cowboys in round 2. I kind of talked about this in the previous video. I had him as like a top 15 to 20 player. I had him in my mock going 17 to the Bengals, so that was a huge steal for the Cowboys. And also Mike Green with the Ravens. He went 59 to the Ravens. There was some talk about like character issues, but the production, I mean, 17 sacks, he led college football, so I think there's too much upside in getting him, at 59th when I thought he was like a top 15 to 20 talent, and, it was a huge steal. In the 3rd round, the Cowboys got Shavon Revel Jr. I talked about this before in a previous video as well. He was honestly like a late 1st round talent, but because of injury, he fell to the 3rd round. We got him at 76th, so he probably fell like 40 to 50 spots. So it was a huge steal for the Cowboys. He'll be a day 1 starter alongside Trayvon Diggs. And another honorable mention is the Falcons got a huge steal, I believe, getting Xavier Watts at 96th. I think he can be, a day 1 starter, alongside Jesse Bates in the Falcons defense, those 2 safeties. So this is a huge steal for the Falcons. They got, a few steals. I think they got Jalen Walker at 15. That's another honorable mention. I thought he was a top 5 to 10 talent. They got him at 15, so that was a good pick for them as well. In the 4th round, I have Cam Scadaboo as like my steal. I just love the kid. He kind of does everything. He's like a gadget player. He's a Swiss Army knife. He's like do it all. I don't know if he'll be like a Pro Bowl player, but he's gonna split time with Tyrone Tracy, and he'll be you get a starting running back in the 4th round, and you made a good pick. Also, another honorable mention will be alongside Cam Scadabo is Dylan Sampson. The Browns got a running back, Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. He can split time with Quinshon Judkins. I think Judkins will be like the main running back and get most of the playing time, but Dylan Sampson can come in on 3rd down and I think make an impression. In the 5th round, obviously, my steal and my most valuable pick is Shedeur Sanders. I had him as a top 10 pick. I don't know why he didn't go in the 1st round or the 2nd round. I mean, I could see him sliding in the 2nd round, but to slide all the way to the 5th is pretty insane. So I mean, the Browns really got a steal there. And then my honorable mention is Jaden Blue. The Cowboys got the running back from Texas, Jaden Blue. I thought he was a steal just because 2 reasons. Like, the Cowboys are pretty much horrible at running back right now, and also the fact that he did run a 4.38 40, so he's like very fast. So it gives us another extremely quick weapon alongside Turpin, who runs like a sub 4.4 40, our wide receiver 3 or 4, and our punt and kick returner. So I think it's speed kills, so to have a speedster I think is great. So I think he could be a day 1 starter. I think he could potentially beat out Miles Sanders and Javon Williams. So if we get a starting running back in the 5th round, it was a great value pick. In the 6th, I have Jalen Reed, this safety from Penn State. The Texans got him. He was a good player, multiple year starter. So for them to get him in the 6th round, I think is a great value pick. And then honorable mention, I put Will Howard, the Ohio State quarterback, who led Ohio State to a national championship. And I was kind of telling my buddy, I thought Will Howard just fits like the Pittsburgh Steeler like quarterback persona. If you think about like Big Ben, like Will Howard is basically this, the same size as Josh Allen, 6'5", 240 plus pounds. He has like the run pass option. So I just think, being in Pittsburgh, playing in the cold weather, he just fits that mold. So, and also I think it's a value pick because we really have no clue what the heck the Steelers are going to do at quarterback. We don't know if Aaron Rodgers is going to play, if Aaron Rodgers is going to sign, if he's going to retire. I think he really wants to play, with the Vikings. So, is he going to be, even in the NFL? And, Will Howard might be a day one starter just because they have nobody else, So it's either him or, Mason Rudolph. So at this point, getting a starting quarterback in the 6th round, you don't pay him much money. That's a great value. And then in my final pick, in the 7th round, I have Fadil Diggs, a defensive end that the Saints picked up. I think he has a lot of upside. And it's kind of hard to evaluate these players once you get to the 7th round. Some of the late day 3, picks. But I just feel like he has a lot of upside, good size, good speed. I just think, there's some untapped potential. So I think, if he's able to watch, Cameron Jordan and some of these veteran guys on the defensive line, he could, learn, more techniques. And I think, that ability, will churn into more production. And that's kind of my issue with some of these players, that teams took, in the first, like a Shamar Stewart who has so much upside. But, why take him in the 1st round if he doesn't have, all the tools and he's not going to be a day one starter? You really don't want to take him, these steals I have in the 1st round, like Jahad Campbell, he can be a day one starter. So it's a great value pick. He was a top, 15 prospect. The Eagles got him at, 31. Like Jahdae Barron, a great pick for the Broncos. He's a top 10 talent, day one starter. They got him at 20. Donovan Azaraku, he's a day one starter for the Cowboys, alongside, alongside Michael Parsons, day one starter, 16 and a half sacks, multiple years of production, and we got him at 44th. Shavon Revel Jr., day one starter for the Cowboys, alongside Trayvon Diggs. He's a shutdown blanket corner, not a lot of interceptions, but he's just going to, take, your wide receiver 1, your wide receiver 2, and completely shut him down. Day one starter, we got him in the 3rd round. That's what, Dylan Sampson, Cam Scatterboo, 4th round. Dylan Sampson can split time with, Quinshon Judkins that the Browns got in the 2nd round. 2 rookie running backs that could just compete. They got one in the 2nd round, one in the 4th. Either one could be a starter. And a lot of teams, use 2-3 back systems. Even if you have one workhorse, you still usually have a rotational back. And in Scatterboo, the same thing. Tyrone Tracy, isn't the greatest pass catcher. He has, fumbling, history last year. So he has some issues with that. So Scatterboo kind of comes in as he can run, he can catch, he can pass, So he's kind of this do-it-all kid, and, players like that, you're just so useful, they got to put you on the field somewhere. So it's a value pick. That's why I'm saying, why overdraft a player when, there's talent all throughout the draft. Shedeur Sanders, I'm going to do a video about Shedeur Sanders separately, but, to get, potentially a round 1 or a round 2 quarterback in the 5th round. The Browns, probably will start Flacco, week 1. They give him a 1-year deal, right? $4 million. So they can have him for 1 year. He's 40 or 41 years old. I think he's 40. He'll be their day one starter. But at some point, the Browns aren't going to be a good team. At some point they're going to, either put in Shedeur Sanders. I think Kenny Pickett will get cut. I don't think Dylan Gabriel is a starting quarterback. I think he'll be the 3rd string quarterback. And, in 2026, it's going to be Shedeur's team. And it'll be, Dylan Gabriel will be the backup. I don't think they need 4 quarterbacks. So I think, Kenny Pickett's the weakest link. I think he'll be gone. But, to get a starting quarterback in the 5th round, when the Cowboys got Dak in the 4th, we didn't pay him any money for 4 years. So we were able to build a team around him. We had Ezekiel Elliott. We had the best offensive line, in the NFL, so we had, Amari Cooper and like weapons for him. So, when you have a quarterback on a rookie contract, especially when he's not in the first round, Shedeur Sanders probably lost like $30 to $50 million going from, a first round pick to a 5th round pick. So he's, $30 to $50 million, less expensive for the Browns So they can spend another $30 to $50 million putting talent around him, for 4 years, and then he'll probably restructure his contract at some point, especially if he's successful. But I'll do another video on Shedeur Sanders, and I put Jade in blue, just because like number one, like the Cowboys are like really bad at running back. We don't have a lot of options. So Jade on blue can come in as a 5th round pick and be our starter, and we have addressed some offensive line issues in the 1st round, and then we addressed it later in the draft in day 3. So we'll have a better offensive line, and we might not even keep all our running backs. I'm assuming we probably get probably cut Miles Sanders at some time, and we keep Javon Williams, and we keep Jade on blue, and then in the 7th round we drafted Phil Maffa. So that might be our 3 running backs, and then 2 of those running backs are our rookies. So in the 7th round, like a lot of these players in the 7th round might not even make the team. So if the Saints can get like a defensive end that can even make any type of an impact, and make the team and be some type of a rotational player when they're rotating their line, because when teams do hurry up offense, if they're able at some point to call a timeout, they rotate their defensive line. If you can get in that 2nd rotation and they get some production from a 7th round player in his rookie season, that's great. So, and then for us, we need some help on our defensive line on the interior. So right now we have Mozzie Smith as our our kind of like mainstay defensive tackle, and we have Michael Parsons as like our defensive end / outside linebacker. So getting Donovan Azaraku and getting Tommy Akimbasate, I'll probably pronounce it wrong, my apologies. If we can get production from some of these late round guys who have huge upside, but they're a little bit more raw talent, they need to be coached, they need to be rotational players, they might spend a year on the practice squad, but if at any point in that 4-year rookie contract you get production from them and they pop, and they become something more than a day 3 pick, then it's a great value pick. So these are after analyzing the draft, these are like the players that like really stuck out to me. Obviously there was other names. If there's other names that you saw, drop them in the comments. I was trying to only pick like a few players. I didn't want to talk about too many players. There's obviously a lot of good picks in each in all 7 rounds, not just 1 or 2 players. But I was trying to think of like the players that either were the biggest steal early on in the first 3 to 4 rounds, or like the most valuable in like the rounds like 3 to 7 or 4 to 7, like day 3 value that can actually translate to making the roster and stuff like that. So let me know what you think in the comments. If there's other players that you thought were better, let me know. We can discuss it. I'm gonna do another video where I talk about the Cowboys 7-round draft picks, and I'm gonna give them an overall grade. Obviously you can see I was pretty happy with their 2nd and their 3rd round picks, because I feel like those are like really great picks. And I feel like with our first 3 picks of Devin Booker, Donovan Azaraku, and Shavon Revel Jr., we really did get 3 starters, and we did get essentially like 3 first-round caliber talent players in the first 3 rounds, which is great. I was really hoping that the Cowboys would be able to really like nail their first 3 rounds. I think that's very important for teams when you're looking at rebuilding your roster, filling needs, building more talent. Your first 3 rounds you really want to hit out the park. You're in the first round you're looking honestly for obviously a day 1 starter, but really like a Pro Bowl, all pro level talent. And in the 2nd and 3rd rounds you're looking for still potentially day 1 starters, but not necessarily like all pro or Pro Bowl level players, but you're looking for people who can make an immediate impact. And I think we did that. So my next video I'll give my overall grade and my analysis of all the Cowboys 1st through 7th round picks. We didn't have a 4th round pick this year. That's why I had mentioned that I wish we could have tried to trade back with Tyler Booker into the later rounds. We still would have got him. If we would have traded back into like the teens or the early 20s, maybe we could have got additional 5th round pick. If not a 4th round pick, maybe we would have got like a 5th. But if we could have had 2 5ths, we maybe could have got a receiver. Now we have to try to get a wide receiver 2. as either in free agency or as an undrafted free agent. So I think most likely we'll go like the undrafted free agent route. Like there's a lot of talk about, the Cowboys going after Amari Cooper, but that's just, talk. It's not going to happen. He is not going to want to come back. So my next video, I'll talk about the Cowboys draft. I'll give my overall grade, and I'll kind of give like my, full analysis of each pick in each round. And, hope you like this video. Leave your comments. Tell me what you think. If you're a sports fan of a certain, NFL team and you want me to analyze their draft, let me know in the comments. I'll analyze, your favorite team's, draft. I'll give my analysis. I'll evaluate the picks, and I'll give overall grade. So continue to watch these videos. I'm going to come out with a lot of content, a lot of videos. I'll be dropping videos, 2 to 3 times a week. I'll be dropping shorts 2 to 3 times a week. So make sure your notification bells are turned on. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and make sure you're watching these videos and leaving your comments so that we can interact and I can respond, to any rebuttals that you have, because that's kind of the point of the channel. I want to interact with my subscribers. I want to know your opinions, your thoughts, your analysis as well. I'm by no means, expert. I do love football. I do, study football a lot. I study all sports, but, football is my favorite sport. So I feel like I have a lot of knowledge, but, I'm also always willing to listen to everybody's opinion. So let me know what you think. Keep watching the videos. I hope you enjoyed this video and stay tuned. All right. Peace, guys.